So I'm happy to be substituting. There are some really important things that I want to share. I'm going to share with you my end of the cyber business, something that I know about it. I promise I won't teach you something that I don't know about, as well as a follow-up to my presentation on writing an effective CV. I'm going to give a presentation about conducting an effective job interview. And then I'm excited. We have a great cyber star, one of our top graduates from 2 years ago, who has a real good job in pen testing here in Yerushalayim. He's a really good guy. He's from the Mir Koilel. He's Ben Torah. He had an overnight camp from guys in Canada, and now he used to spend the summer in Canada, but now I think he spends the summer here in Eretz Yisrael working. Anyway, he's a real good guy, Shai Aran. So we'll introduce him at 8 o'clock. So the first hour and a half, whatever, we're gonna talk about GRC, risk management, stuff like that. I wanted one more item on the agenda before we get started. And this is sort of a part-time opportunity for anybody here that's interested. In the new cohort, so it's a nice big class. There's actually over 40 students there. And just like always, there's a wide range of levels of technical background. There's people who have degrees in computer science, and there are people that have, almost nothing and have never started, never done much with a computer. Anyway, so one of the students there, she's a smart cookie, European from woman, name is Rechi, and she said, I spent 10 minutes doing my homework and 10 hours helping other people solve their problems. So that's some ratio. Anyway, she said, they need more support just to do the simple things, etc. And we know that is true. So we had actually hired a former student of ours to put in a few hours every week to be online, available for them to hold their hand and, installations and whatever, just to, help them go through things that they find difficult. And then she got a job, a full-time job in incident response for one of the companies that we work with called TetResponse. And so she got a nice salary and a nice offer, so she took it. So she's not available to do part-time teaching assistant. So I'm putting it out there to you, young men and women. If anybody's interested in spending a couple hours online, you'd be in the Slack and whatever, and you do some, share screen, whatever. You're not expected to be a huge expert at this stage, but you have, 6 months more experience than people in the new class. So if it's something you'd like to do, you're the kind of person who likes to do that stuff, send me an email and we'll talk about it. So that was nice for us that another student got a really nice job opportunity. Okay. With that, I'm ready to begin. So I didn't share my slides, which I will do later, but meanwhile, I'm just gonna dive in with your issues. Okay. So we're talking about GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. And we're learning the basics. And again, today, because of who I am and where I'm coming from, my experiences in business and finance, we're going to be coming from that perspective, which I think is really enriching for you. You're not going to get this from Omer or anybody else who are coming more, with the technical background. We're going to be looking sort of big picture at risk management and how important it is, and how, especially as you grow in the field, a lot of what we will discuss today won't be, at your first job, but it'll help you at any job, but especially as you progress and you're talking to managers of organizations, it'll be very helpful. But I will tell you, where did we get the sort of impetus to add this to the curriculum? And it came from this guy named Yair Solov and Dvora Erlinger, who presented to you about her job. She mentioned him and so forth. And he's a friend of ours and someone we've worked with a couple of years now. He has a number of Tzolmik graduates on his team. His team is exclusively Tzolmik graduates. And he said he would like us to incorporate some of these topics into the class, whether it's one class or ongoing. And he offered to send some of his people to teach some of it and so forth. So I'm going to share with you now, this is the content essentially of an email that we got from Yair, who is the CEO of Central Eyes. It's cute name for a company. And they used to be called CyberGov, and now they're called Centralized, and they're in Airport City. So the first four I put in bold because that's what I'm going to talk about today. Cyber risk as a business risk, okay? Understanding and being able to communicate to managers that, cyber risk is going to cost them money. They need to deal with it. Identifying unique threats to an organization based on what that organization does and its position vis-a-vis the internet and so forth. Like if you sell falafel, so, what are your cyber risks? Well, if you do credit cards, then maybe that, but, maybe you don't have much cyber risk because you sell falafel. So as long as you can fry the oil and put the chickpeas in, then you don't have much cyber risk. So every business has to be, analyzed according to the nature of their business to see what is the nature of their risk and particularly their cyber risk. Identifying and documenting critical business assets. Okay, that's in every business. Someone could steal your secret recipe, Hyla says. Okay, I like that. I mean, that's not Hyla, you don't, whatever. Yes, but why would your secret recipe be online? Unless you emailed it to somebody, but your secret recipe should not be online, or it should be encrypted. So yes, you're right, that needs to be taken into account. Leadership's vital role in managing cyber risk. Okay, that's a really key thing that, like everything in life, leadership and management is really important. I mentioned that, of course, I went to business school. I did a program of Boston University here in Israel. It was in Ben Gurion, in Beersheba. And there was something called the business game. It was an operations management course. And we divided up into teams. And you had to cut and fold paper and make it into some sort of meaningless product. And then it would be judged by a quality control team. And you had a certain amount of time, and we played 3 rounds, whatever. And we were in groups, and it was a competitive game to see which company could organize themselves and manage their operations to create these paper products, that would be worth the most money, whatever. So our group, we were a bunch of yeshiva bachrim taking the course together, and we knew that we didn't have much manual dexterity. So we decided on a management strategy. We're going to produce as many as possible at very low quality, even though many of them were going to be rejected by QA, but we would have so many that we'd overcome the low quality and the low price that we'd get for our product. Another group were actually a bunch of kindergarten teachers or women who had, primary education background. So they were really good at cutting and folding and stapling and all that stuff. And so they made these beautiful products. But what I learned from that game was that management really matters. I always wondered, does it really matter the decisions that management makes, or it's just the people have to do what they're supposed to do? And I learned from that game, as well as from other things, that management decisions, attitudes, leadership, what you decide to do, what you decide not to do, where you put the emphasis, make all the difference in the world. And cybersecurity, I mean, you've been exposed enough at this point in the course to know how important it is. And that a company.
So what happened? I'm confused.
What happened in the game, in the business game?
Yeah.
Well,
the story.
The kindergarten teachers took it all because they were so good at making those paper products.
I hear.
Yeah. So you win some, you lose some. So back to the importance of leadership and management. And again, as a cybersecurity expert or advisor, consultant, you need to be able to communicate with leadership of a company and tell them, give them guidance of making responsible decisions about investing, where to put their assets. You could buy a really fancy software. There's, a real lot of different products on the market in cybersecurity. And so you have to learn, what is worthwhile to spend on and what not, and so forth. So there's a lot of decision making involved. The next thing that Yair mentioned was understanding GRC and IRM. IRM is incident response technology, fundamental pieces of operating a GRC platform. And again, Centralized has a GRC platform. And so part of their concept with the internship that they are offering and recruiting for is hands-on training using their platform. He talked about maintenance of a risk register. Okay, obviously some sort of book of, keeping track of the risks that have occurred or could occur. Okay, thank you, Eliezer. legal and regulatory requirements, cyber and privacy, and that actually is in our curriculum. Later in a couple weeks, Omer will be addressing that. Issue management, designing and implementing a mitigation strategy. Okay, so those actually are a little more technical, and they are in the syllabus coming up in a month or two. So today I'm going to be focusing more on like business risk and stuff like that, and identification of threats and so forth. So intro to risk management, and I like to use YouTube videos. So that's what I'm going to do now, is share a YouTube video.
In this video, we will be discussing risk management. Risk is a situation involving exposure to danger. Risk management is understanding the threats facing our organisation and the steps that can be taken to prevent, reduce, or prepare for possible situations that may or may not occur. There are three different areas of risk: human risk, such as fraud, theft, or human error; natural risks, like floods, fires, or earthquakes; or technical risks, such as software failures, hardware failures, or a lack of skilled knowledge. We can dive into risk management by asking ourselves a series of questions, starting with, what is our business trying to achieve? It is only when we know exactly what we are doing that we can begin to work out what might go wrong. We can then work backwards to identify the obstacles and problems that might prevent us from achieving our goals. Which of these things is most important? By assigning value to critical assets, both financial and reputational, we can start to evaluate how much of a concern specific threats are to a particular organisation. An effective way of doing this is by scoring each scenario on the likelihood of them happening, and secondly on the harm that their happening would cause. This will offer great understanding of where our focus needs to be concentrated. What should we do about it? Once we have identified our main areas of concern, we can take the following actions. We might decide that either a threat is too high or not enough of an importance to the overall running of our business and decide to avoid it altogether. We might choose to reduce certain risks by implementing various tools such as surveillance cameras or antivirus software. We could decide that although aware of the risk, in the grand scheme of things it's either beyond our capability to deal with the scope, or it's too unlikely for us to worry about, and so accept the risk and continue without action. In this situation, at least we know that the conversation has arose. We can also decide to transfer the risk if necessary, with help from third-party organisations or suitable insurance products. Lastly, we need to ask, what has changed? Provide tactical and strategic recommendations to improve future process. Security is not one set of rules to check, tick, and put back in the filing cabinet. It is an evolving organism and needs to become a culture within the working environment, and part of the success of this is to constantly refresh and review the systems, technologies and protocols in place in respects to the fast-paced change of the world around us. We live in a data-driven world, and the reputation of every organisation relies on people trusting companies with their information. Risk management quantifies steps taken to protect this information and helps avoid litigation as well as reputational damage, both of which would lead to loss of revenue. Risk management is a proactive step to help the structuring of an organisation. It provides early identification for all staff to be aware of so that they can trigger the correct lines of communication if and when they occur. Being aware of threats and putting in guidelines to prevent them are not hurdles to slow process down, but vital components to offer smooth, consistent running of a business. Risk management gives your organisation support and understanding to help the success of its journey.
Okay.
Hi, this is Brian with some super
Sorry.
exciting news. Optimize.
Okay. So I want to share something that they mentioned about risks that there's almost nothing we could do about them, or it would cost too much to do something about them. And so I want to give you a really practical example. You're running a store and there are shoplifters. So you're losing some money every month from product that's going out the store without getting any money for it. So what can you do about that? So you could install cameras, you could put up signs, shoplifters will be prosecuted to, the full extent of the law. You could frisk everybody that leaves the store, right? You could, force them, we could strip search them. I mean, we could take really aggressive actions against them, but what will that do to our business? It could be that the money will save, let's say we're losing $1,000 a month in shoplifting, but having a full-time security guard there who's going to frisk people or whatever is going to cost us $5,000. So anytime we make a management decision about a risk and the mitigation of that risk, we have to ask, what are the business costs of it? So in this case, it could be that the money we spend mitigating the risk of shoplifting is going to cost us more money than what we were losing in the shoplifting. So we decide not to do it, and we accept the fact that we're going to lose $1,000 a month on average to shoplifting. Or alternatively, we could, let's say frisking people, that will stop the shoplifters, but it'll stop the customers from coming into the store because it's so unpleasant to be put through that. So that's like an unintended consequence of our management decision to increase the security of our store and to mitigate the threat of shoplifting. We've killed our business because now even our faithful customers don't want to come into our store because they don't like being treated like a criminal. So this balance of what are the costs and the benefits, what are we increasing? We're increasing our security, but it's going to cost us money. What are the unintended outcomes or the possible outcomes of the measures that we take? These are very, very important management and business decisions that have to be taken into account. And bring it even more closer to the center of cybersecurity. People ask, they talk, what's the best kind of a door? Okay. So it depends what your door needs to do. Okay. If it's a door to the outside, is it a door to the safe? Or is it a door between, your kitchen and your dining room? So the amount of security that you need on any given door depends on the usage of that door and what's on both sides of the door, who has access to the door. So in any decision we make in terms of deployment of assets regarding security, we're always going to be making a trade-off of probably convenience, okay, and other expenses. And I'll give you another example of this. In America, Americans very much treasure their freedom. And even after 9/11, they had to take off their shoes in airports and go through so much security. It was a very, very difficult adjustment for many Americans. Israelis were more used to it. And Israelis, have been accepting of the fact that in order to protect ourselves from constant threats, we have to have our bags checked going into the mall, going into a train station, whatever. And Americans, just barely will put up with that, but they see it as a violation of their freedom. So anytime you're increasing security, you're sort of decreasing freedom or privacy and so forth. So these are always trade-offs that you have to, weigh them in the balance in order to make effective decisions. And this is, critical thinking about these topics. So let me go back to my presentation. And we introduced risk management. Okay. I want to share with you again some insights about risk management from the business world. And this is, it's about 1-year-old news. The SEC changes rules affecting risk factors, litigation disclosure of US public companies. So a lot of the companies that you may ultimately work for may be publicly traded companies that their shares are listed on a stock exchange. And if your shares are on a stock exchange, you have to comply to a real lot of rules. You got to tell people what's going on in your company. So there are quarterly filings that you need to make and annual filings that you tell the world what's going on in your company so they can make an informed decision whether or not it's worthwhile to invest in the company. So one of the things you need to tell them are all the risk factors that are associated with buying the stock, with being, an owner of the company. So again, I worked as a CFO of a publicly traded company. So this was my field a little bit. And in the risk factors of an SEC filing, it's often, 15 pages or more. And I'd like to show you, I'm going to show you an example of Walmart in just a minute. But what the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, they made a rule that if the risk factors section exceeds 15 pages, which sounds like a real lot, and it is, which is often the case for many companies. So the company must include a 2-page summary of the risk factors using concise, bulleted, or numbered statements in the format of the prospectus or the annual report. This will require a change for many companies. The SEC estimates that 40% of companies have risk factor sections which exceed 15 pages. So again, that's sort of, to an outsider, it's remarkable that, before you invest in this company, whether it's Coca-Cola or General Electric or Walmart, you want to make a decision. So the company has to share with you information about their company, and they need to tell you about risk factors. And those risk factors take up, 15 pages. And I do want to share with you what it looks like, because I know a lot of you have not had exposure to the world of investments and stuff like this. So this is something called EDGAR, which is access to SEC filings. I'm not sure if you can see it. No, let me do it. Okay. And you can get to it just from, Yahoo or however you get, if you're looking at companies and their stocks. So I'm looking at a filing of Walmart. Okay, you see this is Walmart. Everybody knows Walmart, a giant retailer all over the world, billion dollar company, etc. And I'm now in the risk section of their filing. So I want to just show you the kind of things that they need to take into account in their risk section. Strategic risks, okay? Failure to successfully execute our omni-channel strategy and the cost of our investments in e-commerce and technology may materially advance our market position, net sales, and financial performance. And the truth is, when you read these things, by the time you finish reading it, you would never want to invest in anything. And so, a lot of people skip it, but you're required to print these things and to share them with the public, to explain to them what are all the risks involved in your business. So in bold are the risks and then the explanations. I'm going quickly just through the list of risks because I do want to talk with you today. I want to do an experiment, even to do a demonstration of calculation of risk for a company. So I want to give you ideas of what are the types of risks that a company faces. If we do not timely identify or effectively respond to consumer trends or preferences, it could negatively affect the relationship with our customers, demand for the products and services we sell, our market share, and growth of our business. We face strong competition from other retailers and wholesale club operators, which could materially adversely affect our financial performance. General or macroeconomic factors, both domestically and internationally, may materially adversely affect our financial performance. Things outside the company, the economy is bad, right? Whatever happened, COVID, they're going to mention that. The performance of strategic alliances and other business relationships to support the expansion of our business could materially adversely affect our financial performance. We've decided to do a joint venture with another company, and then that other company goes under. So our joint venture, suffers, and we lost a lot of money. Operational risks. The impact of COVID-19 pandemic on our business, financial position, and the results of operations is in many respects unpredictable, and we may be unable to sustain our revenue growth rate in the future. Natural disasters, climate change, geopolitical events Global health epidemics or pandemics, catastrophic events could materially adversely affect our financial performance, right? If there's an earthquake or, a whole country, let's say in the Caribbean, Haiti, there's massive flooding and there's a Walmart there. So the whole, store is lost, whatever. Of course, they have insurance for that, but it affects their business. Risk associated with our suppliers could materially adversely affect our financial performance. So Walmart is selling stuff produced by other companies. And if those other companies are unable to produce their goods, so that could affect Walmart's performance. Hannah said possible side effects on medicine. Yes, that is a risk, a health risk, and that would affect their profitability. If the products we sell are not safe, here, that's almost what you're talking about, or otherwise fail to meet our customers' expectations, we could lose customers, incur liability for any injuries suffered by customers using or consuming a product we sell, or otherwise experience a material impact to our brand, reputation, and financial performance. We are also subject to reputational and other risks related to third-party sales on our digital platforms. Okay, so reputational stuff is really important. You recall a couple of years ago that a black guy came into Starbucks and was sitting there and didn't order any coffee. And they asked him, do you want to order anything? He says, no, I'm waiting for my friends. And a few minutes later, they come over again and say, you want to order anything? He says, no, I'm waiting for my friends. And then they brought the police and they arrested him. And it was a really big scandal because if he had been white, they wouldn't have done anything, because people do that all the time. They sit in Starbucks waiting for their friends to come without ordering anything. But because he was a black guy, they called police against him. And it was a really big deal that affected Starbucks immensely. And so that's it affected their reputation. And so then, people want to boycott them or don't want to come to them, whatever. So there's a million things that could, present risk to a big name company. We rely extensively on information systems to process transactions, summarize results, and manage our business. Disruptions in our systems could harm our ability to conduct our operations. So we're getting closer to cyber now. If the technology-based systems that give our customers the ability to shop with us online do not function effectively, our operating results, as well as our ability to grow our omni-channel business globally, could be materially adversely affected. Okay, so if the Walmart.com, whatever, goes down or something like that, digital platforms. Okay, here is, this is what I've really put into my presentation. Go back to that. Case study, Walmart's risk factors from their 10K SEC filings, cyber risks. Any failure to maintain the security of the information relating to our company, customers, members, associates, and vendors, whether as a result of cybersecurity attacks on our information systems or otherwise, could damage our reputation, result in litigation or other legal actions against us, cause us to incur substantial additional costs, and materially adversely affect our business and operating results. Okay, so they're talking about, cybersecurity risks. Like most retailers, we receive and store in our information systems PII, personal information about customers and members, et cetera, et cetera. Cyber threats are rapidly evolving, and those threats and the means for obtaining access to information in digital and other storage media are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Cyber threats and cyber attackers can be sponsored by countries or sophisticated criminal organizations, or be the work of hackers with a wide range of motives and expertise. We and the businesses with which we interact have experienced and continue to experience threats to data and systems, including by perpetrators of random or targeted malicious cyber attacks, computer viruses, worms, bot attacks, ransomware, or other destructive or disruptive software and attempts to misappropriate customer information, including credit card and payment information, and cause system failures and disruptions. The increased use of remote work infrastructure due to the COVID-19 pandemic has also increased the possible attack surfaces. Attack surfaces is a term used for exposure of places they could attack you. Some of our systems and third-party service provider systems have experienced limited security breaches or incidents. And although they did not have a material adverse effect on our operating results, there can be no assurance of a similar result in the future. So I wanted to bring this example of Walmart. That's not, a cyber company per se. They do business online as well as their giant business in store, but all of it could be greatly affected by cyber risks. So this again is a quotation from their SEC filing that they're very much aware of cyber risks. And so you can be sure that Walmart has a large, cybersecurity defense team, or whether they're outsourcing it or in-house, I don't know. But it's important to running their business and managing their risk. Okay, so to understand the numbers in risk and so forth, I wanted to go a little more in detail. So here there's something called probability impact matrix. Okay, and I call the beauty of algebra that, anytime you want to know the likelihood of an outcome, so the beauty of algebra is if you say I have a 50% chance of making $100, so you multiply, 50% of 100 is 50, okay? And so that is your sort of risk adjusted or likelihood adjusted, your probability of a given outcome. So it can be done on the positive side of, profits you're going to make. We have a 10% chance of selling $1 million deal. So if I'm calculating or making projections for this year's income, and again, I have 10% chance of selling $1 million, so then I have projected income of 100,000, right? So the same thing is true of risk. Risk equals probability times impact, okay? And risk, there's talk about how to define exactly risk, but the simplest way, think of risk as losing money, okay? It all comes down to losing money in the end. So a business has to be concerned with risk. And in terms of calculating risk, you take the probability that a certain event is going to happen and you multiply it by the amount of money, the impact you would lose if it did happen. And the resulting risk estimate represents a probable loss. Example, an ice cream cone costs $5 and a toddler has a 10% chance of dropping it without help. So the risk is 10% times $5, 50-cent risk, okay? And I would like to take you to this website if I can. Sure if I can come up with it. Well, I'll just tell you outside what he said, the author. This is a real good site. It's the site called Simplicable, and he really explains things really simply and clearly. And so he talks about if the toddler drops the ice cream cone, so I'll lose the ice cream cone, but what if he drops it in the car? And so it ruins the upholstery of the car. There could be what we call, collateral damage here. And I'll have to replace or, at least take my car to the car wash or maybe even replace the upholstery in the car so that there is a small chance that there'll be a much greater loss. And so, you'd have to take that also into consideration when calculating the risk of buying the ice cream cone for the kid or letting him eat it in the car and so forth. But again, we have algebra to help us of making an estimate. And it's hard to make estimates, but it's also important. And we learned that also in business school, that of course, if anybody knew the future, they'd be a very wealthy person. We don't know the future, but we have a professional responsibility to make educated guesses and assessments, estimations, approximations. And that's what business is about, is sort of forecasting the unknown. And
you have to make all the calculations, right?
What do you mean by that? All the calculations?
Meaning in this example with the ice cream cone, right? This is pretty generic. It's the basis of the problem, right? But let's say you said it drops in the car. That's also part of the calculations. And let's say he drops it in the street and somebody falls over it and then they sue. Meaning
right.
they have to. So for calculating risk, you have to calculate all the possibilities, all the eventualities.
That's right. any possible, contingency that may take place, you have to consider it. And again, maybe it'll be such a low, it'll be so close to zero, the chance of it happening, that it comes out to be, essentially zero. So you can discount it. But you do need
Right.
to think creatively in listing your risk. That is true.
So how, I mean, I guess it depends on the situation, depends on the scenario, but how low do you, meaning when does it become
Good question.
obsolete already?
Yeah, good question. So it's going to be a function of how much it would cost you, right? Because if it's even a 0.1% chance of something happening, but it's going to be $100 million liability. So when you do the math, it's still meaningful.
Right.
So again, you have to run the math, and there's like sophisticated software for this stuff, but I want to show you today just sort of pencil and paper. I want to do an exercise about this of, coming up with risks and so forth, which we'll do, in a few minutes. So
I guess it's the same thing that we said with like getting your code to run faster, even if it's a fraction of a second. But if it's significant in the capacity that you're able, that it's necessary, let's say on the stock market, right? So if you're writing software for trading and you're doing 1 million trades in every hour, even if it's a fraction of a second, that means a lot more money per trade.
yes, you
Per
can
day,
lose
not
faster or make or win faster. But yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. So you do have to take into account, you have to be creative. And again, one of the things I wanted to show you about those SEC filings is that here is a publicly traded company. They're obligated, and there are, professionals, actuaries and accountants, who that's their job, to come up and to propose all different avenues of risk that may affect the company. Again, it's bad weather, it's a fire, it's sabotage, it's terrorism, it's cybersecurity, and everything else. And so that is part of the management and the business responsibility to consider risk, identify risk, quantify risk, and then to have a strategy to mitigate risk, right? And to make decisions about, well, what are we going to do about it? Do we need to do something about it, and so forth? And so as cyber professionals, you have a role to play in this process regarding the cyber risks that the company is exposed to.
Jonathan?
Yes.
So you mentioned before about how you would have to measure the precaution, like the solution, whether it's too costly to fix the problem. Is there a way of quantifying that and then comparing those numbers to the risk factor? Is that how it's done?
Exactly. That's exactly how it's done. We're going to run through a pencil and paper where we're going to list our assets and make a list of the risks that they're exposed to. What's the likelihood of that contingency happening? What would be the amount of loss we would suffer? We could then multiply those numbers out, and then we could propose, mitigation. What could we do to defend against this or get insurance for this, et cetera? And then we're going to compare those costs. And it could be that the risk exposure is less than, what it would cost us to buy the insurance or to, get the expensive software system or hire the armed guard or whatever it would be. So again, in business all the time, you're looking for efficiency and making, cost benefit analysis to see, what do we need to do and at what price does it become prohibitive that it becomes essentially resource ineffective. So yes.
One more question.
Yes.
I'm just curious, you were talking before about how publicly traded companies, have to publish in their quarterly or annual report about the risk management. Is there ever a time when such a report could expose vulnerabilities to the company?
Shouldn't do that, right? I mean, there shouldn't. I mean, let's. One of the things we're going to see today is the word reconnaissance, right? Part of the attack. Part of an attack vector when the hackers are going out against the company, they're looking for information about the company. And, there's what's called OSINT, which is open source intelligence, okay? Stuff that's out there in plain sight, that if you just read the website of the company and you read all their SEC filings and you read everything in the public domain that you can about the company, you're going to learn some stuff that, not everybody knows, But if you're, astute and you're diligent in your reconnaissance, you're going to know some stuff. So the company, of course, has to be very vigilant and very careful of what they do expose in their filings. They're obligated to expose a certain amount of their business, platform, of how they make money and what are the risks involved and so on and so forth. But they also, of course, like you're saying, need to be careful not to expose information that puts them at risk. For example, what systems do they use? Who are their vendors, in terms of cybersecurity threats and things like that. Malia says it seems more general, that the filings are more general. And I think that's basically true. Moshe asks, does the security team of a company usually do this assessment, or is it more the job of the management in general, and they will pass on their findings to security team? So I love this question, and I want to share something with you. And that is, again, cybersecurity as an industry is still a very young industry, but some of the leaders of the industry are the giant auditing companies, okay? So, it used to be called the Big Eight or something of, the big accounting firms, Price Cooper and Waterhouse, whatever. And I can't say, I'll spit out the names right now, but basically those companies who do audits for other companies, the accounting firms, one of the things they needed to do always was to assess risk. And again, they're meant to protect the investors and to be objectively pointing out existing risk. So that was the obligation of the corporate management team to work with these auditors, focusing on possible risks. And it is only in the past couple of years that there are now people who, report directly to the chief executive officer. Somebody called, the CSO was the chief security officer. And today there's a CISO, chief information security officer. And that's become, a new job. It's a very good paying job, obviously, if you're the CISO of a big company. And actually, this woman who works with us, I'm not going to say confidential information, but she's hot stuff in terms of her experience in the Israeli army in cyber, makes her really a world expert. And she now has some really impressive companies. I mean, I think she has Coca-Cola and a few others like that. And she is like their virtual CISO, okay? And she is, hiring our students to basically do the ant work, do some of the foot soldier work beneath her. So there's a security team, again, like in this case, they're outsourced, but they are making this assessment and, providing the services necessary to analyze these risks and propose possible mitigation technologies. And they're handing that on to the management team, because again, the CEO is a business guy, and the CFO is an accounting guy, and the CMO, the chief marketing officer, is a sales guy. So they don't know about cyber risk and how to deal with it. So you have a technical team, a security team, who are, handing this information over to top management. And today they're becoming part of top management. So that's the first thing, that the communications, of course, going in both directions. Hannah says, if you have done your research properly, the general information can expose more because you have some of the background information. That's of course true, right? And that's what, look, the dangers are huge, and it's a dangerous world out there. Sruli, thank you. Deloitte, Deloitte is who I was thinking of, KPMG, Shkoyach, Ernst Young, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. So those are the four big ones today, that's right. And they are really big in the cyber industry today, okay? Because since they were naturally the vendors of auditing for publicly traded and any large company, you basically had to be working with one of these accounting firms. So then when you needed people to give you services in order to meet compliance standards and regulations, you needed someone to sign off and say that you're compliant with cybersecurity regulations and standards. So you went to the same people. So Deloitte and Ernst & Young have very large cyber units within their companies today. Those are really good places to work. They're really rich companies. You have to be that type of person. You have to be like a corporate type of person, sort of the 9-to-5 person. But if you can get there, that's a really great career goal and a career pathway, if that speaks to you. which is a risk that companies are now learning about as cybersecurity plays a bigger role? Well, I mean, you've begun to learn about some of the attack.
It wasn't a question, it was an addition to what I wrote before.
Okay. Oh, I understand. Comma, which is a risk. Okay, gotcha. My dad is a partner at Ernst & Young. Surely, oh, direct message. Okay, don't sharing confidential stuff. Very good. Very nice. You're very good. Okay, let me go back to my slide. And I'm talking about risk management. And stages of risk management include, of course, risk identification. What are the risks? Okay. Risk analysis. What's going to happen if that happens? And then risk mitigation strategies. What are we going to do if that happens? Okay. And so we're going to have to assess costs of all these things, the money in, the money out. So again, this really good site's applicable. He has types of risks. It's very comprehensive. Like, you know, as an outsider or as just a consumer, we don't think about all this stuff. But all those people in the tall buildings in Tel Aviv and New York, they're working all day and they're thinking about this stuff. They're thinking about business risks and compliance to all the relevant rules and regulations, laws, financial risk, investing risk. Positive risk, I looked that up. I wasn't sure what positive risk was, but it basically means that you sell more than you have, like things go too good for you. And so it could, you know, endanger your company. And it's a machlokes whether that's really a risk or not. Resource risk, let's say you sell something, but you need to access coffee or steel in order to produce what you produce. And you can't always get the resource because there was a flood, you know, where the coffee beans grow, or there was a strike in the harbor. So, you know, that happens if they go on strike in, you know, in Ashdod or something, so you can't get the stuff you need to produce your goods.
Like
Strategy risk.
like there was a shortage of petrol here in the UK. So loads of companies ran out of water because the trucks did not have petrol. So all the shops are out of water now.
Right now that's happening?
Yeah. It's just happening.
Really? Oh my goodness. Okay, so do you have water, Mary?
I do.
Okay, good. Take care of yourself. Technology risk is an obvious one. You're using technology, and what if it fails? What if you buy a new technology and then, you know, it doesn't work, or it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and so forth. Competition is, of course, a risk. Economic risk, the economy goes up and down. That affects how many people are going to buy your stuff. Maybe you have a restaurant. And so if times are good, people like to eat out and spend a lot of money. But if times are really bad, obviously, though I don't know where I would put it here, but like the pandemic was a huge risk to think how many businesses that killed of restaurants and all the people's jobs who worked in the entertainment industry. So there's, you know, and again, just living through the pandemic as we all have, you see that even remarkable scenarios that hadn't happened in 100 years do happen. And so things, oh, it's so remote, it'll never happen. Yeah, it will happen sooner or later. So things do happen. And so if you're a professional manager, you do have to take these things into account. What are you going to do on a rainy day? And what are you going to do if it's a perfect storm and the rainy day, you know, lasts for a whole year? So how are you going to stay afloat then? Innovation risk, we're going to do new stuff, but what if it doesn't work? Political risk, right? We're in a country and the country goes communist, and so they nationalize all our assets in that company. And again, that really happens. Reputational risk, that's also closely related to cyber, that, you know, we got hacked. This even happens to me where, you know, I have on a little website, I have a way to process credit card payments. And there have been attacks on that website. And so then I have a student saying, well, I tried to make a payment on your website for your cybersecurity course, and I got a cybersecurity warning. So that's bad for my reputation. You know, they say, what kind of cybersecurity course do you have if you can't even protect your own website from being hacked? So that's a reputational risk. Seasonal risk, tactical risk, these are many different types of risk. Okay, I want to introduce you to two specific terms called business continuity and disaster recovery. And I'm going to share with you this slide. Disaster recovery is a subset of business continuity that is specific to infrastructure information systems. In many cases, most of the planning and expense of business continuity is systems related, as organizations may have hundreds of interdependent systems that are required to restore business operations. As such, disaster recovery is not a minor subset of business continuity and tends to dominate. Disaster recovery is a large subset or an important part of business continuity. Business continuity is just, what would happen if this happens? Will you be able to keep doing business even if some disaster strikes? So the definition of business continuity is restoring business operations in the event of a serious incident or disaster. And this is something, I don't know, some of you might remember, in New York City, they lost power for 3 days. Oh, it's already more than 10 years ago, but it really happened that there was this huge outage and it affected a number of states, but people living in the New York area did not have electricity for a number of days, which is shocking, but that really happened. And so what's your plan for business continuity if you don't have electricity for 3 days? Hurricane Sandy. Okay, thank you, Malia. I actually don't think, Hurricane Sandy is another example. But this was in New York and it had to do with something else, I think, but it doesn't matter. The point is that in the event of a serious incident or disaster, things could be really different. And do you have a plan to continue your business even under such circumstances? And so the IT people, the cyber people, have to be part of the business continuity plan in restoring the IT infrastructure and the systems in the event of a serious incident or disaster. Because we all understand, okay, Hannah says he lost power for a week during Sandy. That's serious. That, today running a business, you have so many different things going on in your website and your Google and, and Slack and whatever you're using a bunch of different things. And if they all get shut down, sort of suddenly because of, power outage, whatever, how are you going to restore all this infrastructure and get your systems back up and running? A generator comes to mind, but how long does your generator have to go for? A day, a week, whatever. These are all decisions that have to be made in terms of management's planning for business continuity and disaster recovery, and the cyber people play a role in that. Okay, your father hooked the car to the heat and the hospital in Israel that was just hacked. Yes, using pen and paper now, right? Yes, it is true. Okay. I got particularly interested in all this stuff. I had a marginal interest, but my interest got perked recently because I saw sort of a book, an online book about it, and it's about risk-based cybersecurity. And so I want to share with you what that means and what he says about it, the author here. The case that he's making is to have risk-based cybersecurity as opposed to threat-based or compliance-based, okay? And this is what he says. Building a successful cybersecurity program isn't easy. One of the key factors is how you define success. In fact, if you define success the wrong way, you will end up with a poor allocation of resources and time. You'll be spending your money and time on wrong stuff. You'll have misleading metrics that create the wrong incentives. Okay, you'll be rewarding people for the wrong things. And you may have grave failures of communication between the security practitioners and management, and that's a problem. This is exactly the situation where many cybersecurity organizations find themselves today. The cybersecurity programs are threat-driven, focused on deploying industry best practice security controls to meet the latest cyber threats. And let me give an example of that. So again, I'm running a really small organization. We have a website, we have online credit card, whatever, but I don't need super sophisticated industry best practice security controls in order to defend myself or the company against cyber threats, because this is just not a risk of ours. So you have to know what are the particular risks of your company. And that's why it has to be risk-based and not threat-based. There's different threats going on, but let's say, again, what a DDoS attack is when they leverage botnets to send a real lot of data onto your website and they bring your website down. And they've done that to, enormous websites They can bring them down because of the tremendous botnets that they put together. But what would it mean to me that my website went down? Like I said about the falafel guy. So his website's down, but so what? He doesn't do any business based on his website. He does business because people walk up to the falafel stand and buy falafel. And our class is based on Slack or Google or whatever. So you have to know, where does your business take place and to what risks is it exposed, not just to, let's say, read the literature in the industry and follow the industry best practice to keep up with the latest threats, because maybe the latest cyber threats aren't related to your business. So that's why it shouldn't be threat-based. And what about compliance-based? So it's important, of course, to comply with all, relevant regulations. But if you just use compliance to drive your cybersecurity posture, so then you're also maybe missing the boat. It'll be, we want to check the boxes on all the things they say there, the security and the privacy requirements by third-party standards, but these approaches have grave flaws. And the author gave an example. If it says in the compliance, in the regulation, you have to have a perimeter fence around your business. So a guy could say, okay, we need to put up a fence around the perimeter of our property where we have our offices. And they put up a 2-foot fence made out of sticks, okay? So have they complied with the rule? They have. But does it really provide any security? It doesn't. It keeps the rabbits out, but it would not keep an intruder out. They can step over a 2-foot fence. So using the compliance criteria to stimulate thought is a good idea. Again, you need to comply, but if they say you need a fence around your perimeter, you should ask yourself, well, is this really going to keep out intruders? Maybe we need CCTV. Maybe we need cameras also. Or maybe we need, armed guards to ride around. Maybe we don't, but we're going to use the compliance criteria to stimulate thought and a more material assessment of our actual risks. So the point here, yes.
I guess it's because it's ever-changing world, and maybe you sort of answered it with the idea that the CISO is now in charge of this type of specific area, but like, how do you, as a cyber professional, explain to somebody, like you said, who's a business head, the CEO or whoever you were supposed to be, or the CFO, let's say he's in charge of finance, right? You're supposed to talk about budgeting, that they hire you to be the cyber professional, and you say, like, I remember when we had one of the cyber stars, the CISO in the beginning, I forgot her name, but she spoke to us, and I said, how do you judge success? She says, by knowing how many things I stop. But at the end of the day, you could have, let's say you're a big company, you could have 50 attacks that day or that week or whatever, and she stopped, let's say 25. That's amazing for her, but you have to report now to the finance team and say, the reason why this went down and this went down and this went down is because we didn't have enough money to stop the attack. And they'll say, well, why am I hiring you? You're the cyber professional.
Yes, Hannah, I like what you said, that like measuring the number of attacks you stopped, that's ridiculous in a way, because like shkoyak, you stopped 50 attacks, but if 5 got through, so then, what good does that do for me? So yeah, you have to have meaningful metrics that are going to truly protect the company and really measure success in a more relevant way. That is true. You asked about how to communicate it to business head. So you can see my LinkedIn now, right?
Yeah.
So Shifra was one of our great students who just completed the course. She's working now as an internship. She's in Brooklyn, and she's now working in Manhattan, a company called CGS, Computer Generated Solutions. And this is, she posted this last week. I really like this. Okay, I think I found a way to explain what we do here in the cybersecurity field in an oversimplified way. No jargon whatsoever. Here it goes. Understand how systems work, understand how they can be broken, find ways to prevent anyone from breaking them in those ways. So what do you think of that? It's
I like it.
yeah, it's not technical at all. It's understand how it works, figure out how to break it, how it might get broken, and then find ways to prevent bad guys from breaking it in those ways. That's how, so that's really effective communication and thinking and really breaking it down to the simplest terms that anybody could understand without knowing anything about computers or internet or networking, right? She explained it in a totally non-technical way. Whatever system you have, there are ways that some people will try to take advantage of it. We're going to think of those ways and then try to make it foolproof so that they're unable to do that. So I really love that post by Shifra. Okay. Risk-based cybersecurity methodology. So again, this author walks us through a threat category risk framework is a quantitative risk framework designed to clearly articulate the probability and amount of economic loss that an organization faces from cyber threats. Yes, same is true of any kind of security, exactly. The approach is simple. The TCR, threat category risk framework, starts with a set of general threat categories. For each threat category, a team estimates the following. 1, the event risk, which is the probability the event will occur in the coming 12 months. The probability that if the event does occur, it will result in the loss of confidentiality or integrity, that is the improper disclosure of information or the unauthorized modification of data or system behavior, or the loss of availability, that is a system outage, or both. The upper and lower bound of damage if a loss of confidentiality or integrity occurs. How much is it going to cost us? Could cost us $1 million, could cost us 1,000. So I need to know the upper and lower boundaries. The upper and lower boundary of the duration in hours, and the upper and lower boundary of the cost per hour if a loss of availability occurs. So Hannah mentioned about, a trading company. Maybe you're doing online trading, or people access your website and they buy stuff all the time. So you do, 1,000 sales events a day. And so any hour that you're down, maybe there's certain hours that are bigger than other hours. So if a DDoS attack occurred to bring your website down at a certain hour of the day, how much is that going to cost you? And how long is that DDoS attack gonna last? What are the likelihoods of these events? And what is the upper and lower boundary of the amount it's going to cost you? So once you've been able to make educated guesses to assessments, appraisals, approximations of these numbers, then you can come up with a quantitative risk assessment. Okay. Someone said they compared it to Gaza. Impossible to totally stop them from attacking. Success is by keeping the risk low. So CISO measures success by keeping the attack at low cost. Measuring. It's okay. It's a good concept. The CISO measures success by keeping the attacks low cost. Okay, that is a good comparison. Without getting into politics, it's impossible really to figure out how to, make Gaza into a good place right now. It's controlled by bad guys. And if we killed all the bad guys, so worse guys would take over. So what can we do? We have to keep the cost low. They shouldn't kill a lot of people or nobody, and they shouldn't be able to take us hostage and keep our kids from going to school and et cetera, et cetera. So we want to keep the cost low. Hannah says business heads don't work like that. What do you mean by that, Hannah? Don't know. Okay.
For a security team to measure success like that, that's fine, because you say, I know how many attacks were incoming, and I understand that, let's say these were critical and these were not as critical, right? But the problem is explaining what I'm doing and how I'm being an effective part of the team. If I'm talking to people who don't necessarily understand security at all, and we're coming from a basis that they've been doing the same thing for, let's say, 10 years, and that was working for them. But now in this world that we live in, cyber is becoming much more of a threat, much more of a eventuality. So it's a new idea on the scene of business, but it's a new risk that businesses are not necessarily used to dealing with. So you have to figure out a way to communicate effectively to your business people why cyber is essential and why you need a specific budget and why you need to buy this software and why you need to do these protocols and why you need to, even if you need to outsource, if you need to hire ethical hackers or pen testers who are going to try to break in and figure out how they're going to hack your company, right? So if you want to say, it's great for you to say that if we, like you said, with defense, right? If we hit these protocols and we're good to go and we're going to be safe. That's not necessarily true. And that is what's hard, I think, to communicate effectively to people who don't necessarily think that way and aren't used to thinking that way.
What you're saying is partially true, but today the cyber threat is so prevalent and it's on the front pages all the time, and the losses are so great and it's so well known that it's becoming less difficult to make the sale from the cyber people to the business people, because everybody knows. Who doesn't know? Who's not aware of the prevalence of these dangers today? So you're right on the details of, do we need to invest in this, and do we need to, whether bring in more talent or outsource more stuff, whatever. Of course, basically the cyber people are seen as a cost to the company. They're draining dollars. We might rather spend it on marketing, right, or improving product or image, whatever, but we have to spend it on defensive stuff to protect ourselves. But the need to take this defensive posture is indisputable and sort of obvious, and just it's screaming today from really every rooftop. So the challenge is true, but because of the prevalence and the size of cybercrime and international cybercrime, I think that managers do get it and do understand that this is something really important to their company and to the well-being and the future of their company. They need to be ahead of the curve in terms of adopting a proactive cybersecurity posture.
But does it happen that okay, my father is not in security, but he works in technology, and he has on his status, he says that people say, it says what I say and it says I'm an IT specialist. I'm saying he's more than that now at this point, but that's what he says. And what people hear is I can fix your computer, I can fix the internet, I can every single possible anything to do with technology type of thing to fix. And then what I actually mean by that is I can Google better than the average beer. So that's the idea that I'm coming with, that people think necessarily, and I saw it even when I was looking around on Krebs on security. People, there are people, and if you're in the know, then of course it's imperative, it's important to make sure you have a proper security team. But the people who are hiring sometimes for a business are saying, okay, I understand cyber is a threat. I need to hire a cybersecurity professional. I'm going to hire, let's say, one guy or one team or whatever, and then I'm good to go. That's why I brought back your idea of the fence, that I'm going to do the fence, and then I don't have to think about it anymore. But sometimes you end up taking the fall for it, because they're like, hey, you're the cyber guy. You're the cyber person. Why aren't you dealing with this? And you're like, well, you're not giving me the tools to deal with it. So that was my question: how you speak to the people who are in business and make that connection.
I think it is an ongoing challenge. And so I give credence to what you're saying. That is an ongoing challenge. Communication is a really big part of it. Learning how to communicate, again, in non-technical terms to between management and cyber team, that there should be open channels of communication, and taking the time to really explain the stuff so that it's not just Greek to them, but they really understand the risks involved and what could happen and so forth. So communicating the dangers and the risks and the threat vectors is an important part today of the IT or the cyber team's job, in order to get the funding and to get everybody on board in order to make it happen. And understanding that you will never be 100% safe. There's just no such thing. Anybody can and will be hacked. So that's also part of the message that has to be given over. Moshe said it's changing these days, more and more attacks each week. It's true. It's unfortunate, but it is true that the attacks just are growing. Okay. Cyber threat categories, again, trying to get into a little more detail here of how you would make an assessment of what are the risks to the company, okay? So he uses the term here, left of boom and right of boom, and he explains it that, you know, the boom is the explosion, and it had to do with 9/11, things that happened before the explosion and things that happen after the explosion. So before the explosion is social engineering. They're looking for a way to get in. Once they're in, then they could make a DOS or a DDoS attack. A left of the boom, credential or key reuse, stuffing or brute force, again, to gain access. Once they have access, theft of employee or customer personally identifiable information, PII. Misusing open ports, network shares, manual automated worms, theft of proprietary communication information, web application vulnerabilities, access and theft of data from connected third parties. Third parties is a really big deal. And if you work in GRC, a lot of your time is spent looking at the cyber credentials of the other companies that you work with. If you're going to give them some access to your system, you know, or some data is going to go back and forth. So you need to know, are they compliant, and so on and so forth. So that's a really big job today in companies, is the communications between one company and another before they allow each other any access to their system, to make sure that the other guy's not bringing me in, you know, malware onto my system. There are hardware vulnerabilities, software vulnerabilities, protocol hijacking, physical tampering, and the post-compromise things that happen as a result of them. So these are the things that in risk assessment, in making a calculation of what are we exposed to, these are some of the big words that you're going to be thinking about and analyzing in order to put numbers on them and ultimately come up with, you know, some statistics of what is our exposure. I wanted to take the opportunity to share with you, I'm not sure if you've heard yet the term cyber kill chain. I went to a cyber threat workshop in Washington, DC, and it was really, really interesting. This was a number of years ago already. And most of the people there, I don't know if most, but a large percentage had served in the military, both the men and the women. And so they were used to a lot of military stuff, chat and terminology. And so the term kill chain is a military concept related to the structure of an attack. It consists of target identification, the force dispatch to the target, sending out the people, the decision and the order to attack the target, and finally the destruction of the target. That's called the kill chain. Conversely, the idea of breaking an opponent's kill chain is a method of defense or preemptive action. So it's from Lockheed Martin, a giant US company that makes, you know, airplanes and rockets and whatever else, like sort of like Tassia Avirit in Israel, Rafael, whatever. And they came up with the concept of the cyber kill chain. And today, this is a very common part of the field, terms that you really need to know, the 7 parts of the cyber kill chain. And again, I'm going to go to YouTube. There's actually two nice videos I would like to share about the cyber kill chain.
Academy. This is part 1, the introduction to the cyber kill chain, which is a model developed by Lockheed Martin to understand and counter cyber attacks. So, what is the cyber kill chain? First of all, as mentioned, this model is developed by the Lockheed Martin, and it is a trademark of theirs. And this picture right here is taken from their website, and you can see the link here and in the description if you want to see it and read some more about it and how they developed it. But this cyber kill chain derived from a military kill chain, so it is based on years of military basic understanding of how an attack is prepared and executed. So they have changed it into the cyber attack world, where we are now seeing that cyber warfare is gaining momentum in recent years. And this model describes the structure of an attack, how an attacker starts at the first step by reconnaissance and until the last step where he is executing the attack. And it is divided into 7 stages that describes each step an attacker is taking when doing such attack. So in this video tutorial, we are going to get into the reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and action on objectives. So as I mentioned, this is part 1, and then we are going to have individual lectures on each of these parts, where we are going to learn what this stage consists of and how they can be used, and how hackers are using different tools within each stage to accomplish their goal, which is to make a successful attack. But why is this model useful when we are not hackers ourselves? It is because this model is made for the defensive purpose. It can be used for both attack and defense. In this lecture, we'll be focusing on the defensive matter. And the reason why this model is such relevant is that when you understand the steps and the stages that an attacker is going through, then you start to understand how you can prevent him and how you can detect and react on the stuff that he is doing. So this model can be used to understand the steps, and then in each steps you will see opportunities that will allow you to detect and react upon an attack. So for example, an attacker can do reconnaissance, meaning that if you understand how you do proper reconnaissance, you can yourself try to do reconnaissance on your web page or your web application or your local network and see what kind of weaknesses you can find. This means that you can try to prevent a hacker to gain information you don't want him to get. It could also be in the delivery. Maybe you find a weakness in your entire structure that enable a particular form of delivering. For example, either you are very vulnerable to mails because you don't have a spam filter, or you don't have a lock on your door, meaning that someone could just walk in and put a USB in your computer. So by understanding each of these steps, you will be better off defending against cyber attacks. So remember to like and subscribe, and then I will see you in part 2, where we'll be discussing.
I thought it was a good overview of the cyber kill chain. I actually have
If you manage
something
a team,
that I want to show you also.
hello,
Oops. Okay. I just uploaded the slides, so you have them. And now I'm sharing another, this is a 9-minute one. This is interesting. It's actually from a dental chain. And it's about the cyber kill chain. So it just shows that they're on top of things.
So what is an attack? Cyber attacks can be broken down into 7 distinct stages, which we refer to as the cyber intrusion kill chain. The first stage of the kill chain is called reconnaissance. This is where the threat actor gains information about your business and potentially your employees from your websites, social media pages, other avenues. They want to learn about you. The threat actor may also run what are called botnets on the internet against any internet-facing network devices or applications that your company has to determine weaknesses that could be exploited in an attack. Based on their reconnaissance, the threat actor then determines the best way to weaponize their attack, creating a payload that they'll embed onto an external website that they want to get you to access, or to embed in a file such as a Word document or a PDF that they'll put in a phishing email. Once the payload is weaponized, the threat actor will attempt to deliver it to you. Again, this is usually done through email phishing attacks where individuals encourage the recipient of the email to open the attachment or click a link on the website, which will contain malicious software. In some cases, bad actors have been known to even drop USB devices in parking lots, hoping that someone in the business will pick up the USB device, take it into the office, plug it into a machine, and on that USB is the malware that they want executed, which will then contaminate the system. Then we go into the exploitation phase, and that occurs when the payload executes and takes advantage of vulnerabilities on the device. Typically, these vulnerabilities exist in the operating system or commonly used application software, and sometimes you'll hear these vulnerabilities be called 0 days. If these vulnerabilities exist on your system, installation occurs, and that allows the threat actor to create their initial foothold in your environment from which to launch additional reconnaissance of your network and systems, perhaps dump usernames and passwords, or start actions towards their ultimate goal. At this point, the threat actor will also establish what we call command and control channels back to their home servers so that they can download additional malware, perhaps launch remote sessions into your environment, and then run additional code to move from system to system. Ultimately, their end goal is to get to the actions on objective stage, at which point they will start to steal your data files, destroy files, encrypt them for ransom, and or take other actions to disrupt your business environment. Next slide. Obviously, the earlier you can prevent the attack minimizes the severity of the impact to your business and the costs associated with the mitigation and remediation. So what can your organization do to disrupt the kill chain? To disrupt the reconnaissance phase, watch your social media posts. Periodically check your profiles to see if anybody's cloned them or spoofed them for your identity in an attempt to try to get people to follow them instead of following you, where they can lure perhaps your patients or your vendors into some type of an attack. The link listed on the page, haveibeenpawned.com, actually will allow you to check to see if your credentials have been compromised. Make sure you use different passwords on all your systems. You have business accounts that have passwords. You should have personal accounts which have different passwords. Don't use the same passwords on all your systems. Don't discuss information on details about your systems. Be careful discussing what vendors you have relationships with in open forum, as attackers could attempt to spoof their identities to deliver payloads to you. We commonly say don't open an email or click on a link if you're not expecting it from a particular person. If they're spoofing your vendor or supplier, or maybe even one of your patients, they might get you to click on a file or a link that way. To disrupt the delivery, make sure you've deployed antivirus tools and keep them current. Have your email and web filtering in place to scan any inbound email for threats and to check any outbound web traffic to look for malicious sites and to protect against them. Education is key. There are some good education tools out there, particularly Wombat Proofpoint has some good user education on security practices and how to avoid phishing attacks. Conduct periodic phishing tests if possible. There are some tools and services out there that allow you to send your employees phish tests to see how they would react and to see if they need any additional training in that area. Limit the use of USB devices and configure your computers not to auto-run executables that are stored on them. That's a simple fix to your Windows operating system. To disrupt exploitation, make sure you keep your operating systems and applications up to date and patched. If possible, there are tools out there to run vulnerability scans on your systems to look for potential weaknesses or you may even want to involve an external group to perform a penetration test. The threat actor is looking for holes in your security. You should be doing it as well. To disrupt installation, in addition to good antivirus tools, consider controlling who can install software in your environment and what software can be installed. Only use trusted sources and vendors for software. Potentially use whitelist tools like Microsoft's App Locker to control software. Also consider using multi-factor authentication to control administrator access to key systems and network devices versus allowing employees to have that same access. As we've mentioned, there are some new great zero trust tools out there that are available to prevent the execution of unauthorized code if it should occur in your environment, in addition to the antivirus tools. To disrupt command and control, make sure your network has firewalls in place and periodically check their configuration to limit what is allowed inbound into your network and outbound from your network. There are additional services like Zscaler, which allows you to send all your outbound traffic through a central proxy. And that proxy service will allow you to scan for malicious sites that maybe somebody is attempting to access. It'll also check the traffic to make sure that nothing bad is coming back in. You can also use some of those proxy services to look for leakage of any patient data and send you alerts. In the unfortunate event that the threat actor is actually able to perform actions on objectives to get to the 7th stage, there are some key things that you must have in place. The first is to make sure that you have good backups and secure backups that are available so that you can quickly restore your environment. These backups should be maintained on a separate network and or stored off-site to protect them from the attack itself. Threat actors in ransomware attacks typically target backup systems first to foil your ability to recover so that you're kind of forced into paying the ransom. Have disaster recovery plan developed, outlining the process steps that you need to take and the order in which your system should be restored. Have cyber insurance in place to cover investigative, initial remediation, and charges related to potential damages. And keep a good forensics team on retainer to help your investigation. You may need this in conjunction with any insurance claims that you need to make.
So the cyber kill chain is really important concept that I wanted to make sure that you didn't miss. And so those were the two videos introducing it. Oops. Bracha said that my slides were not uploaded, but do you see them now? Can anyone confirm that they are on the, oh, I know, I uploaded them to the wrong place. Okay. Here we go. Thank you, Bracha, for alerting me to that. Okay. I just have a little more that I want to show you. Okay, I created a risk assessment worksheet. And so we'll take a break in a few minutes, but before we do, let's run through an exercise of coming up with a few samples of risk assessment. So let's choose a business. Does anybody have one that they'd like to, that we could analyze? Just an idea to throw out there?
Brinks.
Brinks, okay, great. So Brinks, their business is they're in like the armed, safe delivery of money to and from banks, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's make a list of 2 or 3 assets which they have and the potential risk that we're going to analyze. So go ahead. I'll start. They have a fleet of trucks, I know, right? Of those really good trucks. What's the risk to that? Someone could blow them up with a bomb. Okay, they could explosion.
Could just break down.
Okay, mechanical stuff.
Robbery.
Okay. How
They could get into accidents and then the workers get hurt.
okay.
Things like
That
that.
would be for the drivers. I think the asset would be drivers on that. No?
Okay, that's good. That's their personnel, their HR. And a risk to it, traffic accidents.
Or they could just be not trustworthy.
Okay,
driver.
that's a really good one. Insider fraud, right? That's a huge thing because that really happens, you know, that people who work for the bank steal the money from the bank and so on and so forth. That's a giant thing. And it's a tough one to guard against because you trust these are people who have the username and password, right? They work for you. So there are, of course, integrity tests that are given in companies, but you know, the people who are really good at it, the social engineers, they often know how to trick the integrity tests. Anyways, it's something always. I'll give you an example from my career. The bankers, the fund administrators who we worked with were in the British Virgin Islands. And also I worked with people in Citibank who were in different places in the Midwest in America. They were obligated to take like a month off of work, paid vacation, but they couldn't just take it off anytime. They had to take a full month to be away from the office. Because the thinking was that if they're doing some scam and they're funneling money, that in a month it should show up. You know, some email should come in or the money should go to the wrong place. So one mitigation tactic of the companies against insider fraud is mandatory vacation to keep them away from the office for a long enough period of time that if there's funny stuff going on, it should come to the surface. So that's an example of a mitigation tactic against insider fraud. But let's do a little bit of
Probably
math.
have some software also to run the whole system of, you know, how
Yeah,
the trucks
okay.
go out when.
Good idea. They have, you know, management software of their distribution system for sure. Okay, so on that they have, well, that could get hacked, right? So there's a cyber risk on that. So maybe let's start with that. What's the value of this asset? Its overall value, or I guess I'm looking at the value that could be lost. Yeah, in order to run my exercise, I'm looking at what's the amount, what's the risk in terms of if it gets hit, what's the high value and the low value of what it's going to cost them. Now,
Well, if somebody hacks in and sends the truck to a different location and gets the money, you're talking a lot of money.
Yeah, fair. Let's throw out a number and say that a Brinks truck never carries more than $1 million. Okay, let's say they have company policy like that, so that, you know, if one truck goes down, they could lose $1 million. Now, if somebody, you know, did the whole system or something, it could be a higher number. But again, I'm just trying to give an example here of how to run some of the arithmetic. And again, in real life, there's probably fancy software that does this, but I'm illustrating it again in this really simplistic, elementary manner in order for us to learn how to think about these things. So let's just go with my numbers of, we have $1 million loss. Okay, if somebody manages to hack into the sort of routing of the truck, they tell the truck, you know, deliver the money to a certain business, and the hackers get in and tell the Brinks driver, he gets instructions on his personal device that he's supposed to deliver the money to a different address. Okay, so the money's going to be taken home by the hackers who were able to give a false information to the driver. Okay, so they're going to lose the full $1 million that gets delivered to the wrong address. So what's the probability of this happening over the course of the next 12 months? What do you say?
Depends how strong their defenses are, how strong, I mean, all their
Okay,
cybersecurity defenses.
good. But so before our defenses or something, just in the abstract, what's the likelihood? We're looking right now sort of at the threat before we're looking at our defenses of the threat. And so let's, I'm just going to throw out a number again for argument's sake of 0.4 or 40% chance that this particular type of attack is going to occur over the next year. So again, I might have a high value and a low value and, you know, different ways of looking at it, but my exposure is very simply 0.4 times my million, okay? Which of course equals 400K, okay? And so that's the risk exposure. So I'm going to spend money on, you know, software protecting, on cybersecurity software, and I'm going to input in the system that before my drivers actually deliver money to any address, they always have to make one last phone call to confirm the address if they've never been there before. And that's going to take them an extra 10 minutes, and 10 minutes times the amount of deliveries that we do in a year is going to cost us, you know, in employee time, it's going to cost us $200,000. So these are the kind of equations I'm going to make in determining, is it a worthwhile mitigation strategy vis-a-vis the amount of money that I stand to lose, okay? So again, I'm just trying to give you the simplest illustration of how to look at that. Yeah, I think we're up to number, right? Yes. So with that, I'm going to conclude this presentation with a quote. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and a few minutes of cyber incident to ruin it. Okay, so again, reputation is a really big deal. And with that, I'm going to call it. And I'm warning everybody to be careful out there. And we're going to take a break. And okay, Anna told us it could be $100 million. Wow. Thank you for the information. Just get hold of those shots, Moshe says. Good idea. But we're ethical hackers, so we're not going to do bad stuff. Okay. How about we meet back again at 7 o'clock? So I have 60 minutes. I'll put it up on the screen. 7 o'clock, we're back here. And the topic under discussion is interview skills. And I will also, again, share my slides. Thank you. See you in 15 minutes.